We have a special show today. We've been honored with a special guest, Professor Murray Straus. Professor Straus is a professor of sociology at the University of New Hampshire. Don't know how long he's been a full professor. I do know that he started in sociology in the 1950s. And he founded and is current co-chair of the Family Research Laboratory at the University of New Hampshire. How long have you been running the Family Research Lab there in the University of New Hampshire?
In 1974. And it does show...
What would you say the effects of this psychological violence, how do they manifest?
Well, they manifest itself. The aspect of it that I studied was depression and anxiety. And being assaulted by a partner increases the probability of depression and anxiety. Now, it does it for both men and women. Men are attacked by their partners. And remember, we have to go back to just as many men are attacked by their partners as women. When men are attacked, it also increases the probability of depression and anxiety, but not as much.
Really?
I think that's because women are more invested on average in relationships. So when something that undermines and attacks a relationship hurts them more. But because it's somewhat more harmful to women, doesn't mean it's not harmful to men. Just like physical attacks, women may be injured more often, but lots of men are injured. We don't say, well, the disease B isn't worth studying because disease A is more harmful. We've got to attend to both.
I'd like you to just interject here. I find it astounding that you're asserting that men are less invested in relationships than women, considering that when relationship breakup that's when men's suicide skyrockets and their depression. Well, I mean, and I'd also point out that when you're talking about a group of people whose social role is to downplay their harm, like their sense of vulnerability, I mean, don't you have to sort of account for the fact that men are trained to man up and not admit to issues and problems?
Yeah, there are lots of different circumstances, but what the empirical research shows, that on average, women have more invested in relationships than men. Average can be very misleading because no one is average. There's always people above the average and below. And so you have to take into account each case. Yeah, I mean, if I get a bit academic, but it's not a myth that men hit women. They do, but women do it. The myth is that it's only men who do it. A lot of men do it. Worldwide, a lot of men hit. My view of the results of the research is that there are multiple reasons. Anyone who focuses on any one of those and suggests or implies that that is the cause is wrong, no matter what the cause is, because this has multiple causes. And we don't get anywhere by denying any one of them. If you're an advocate, if you're running some program, of course you have to emphasize the aspect of it that you're working on. But it's always only one. This is a multiply caused thing. And let's just take patriarchy and male dominance. The research is overwhelming that the more male dominant the society, the more male dominant the relationship, the more likely there is to be an assault. But the research is also overwhelmingly clear that that's only one of many causes and not even the most important cause, important as it is, like each of them are important. just take one of my studies, which is of who's dominant in the relationship.
I'll ask you to speak up a little again, Professor. Sorry.
Well, if you take one of my studies about dominance in the relationship and its relationship to violence, it shows clearly that the more male dominant, the more violence. But it shows just as clearly that the more female dominant, the more violence. And this is whether it's reported by male study participants or female, or whether the measure of dominance is based on the United Nations Gender Inequality Index. I mean, it's the fundamental problem underlying the relationship between patriarchy and male dominance in a relationship and violence is inequality. Any kind of inequality breeds violence. It is a generational problem. That's extremely important. But one has to understand the mechanisms by which things get transmitted from one generation to the other. And of course, as Erin has just pointed out, one of the mechanisms is hitting children. They have the example. Not only is it an example, but it's a demonstration that it's morally correct to hit. Parents, very few parents, simply walk up to a child and hit him. The child has to be doing something wrong, and usually persisting in it. So what's the lesson learned? If someone is doing wrong and persisting in it, it's morally okay to hit them. Well, that's the situation of most partner violence. Sooner or later, all partners misbehave, at least as the other partner sees it. And this kind of learning, it increases the probability of their assaulting the partner for their partner's misbehavior, either to correct it or as in retribution. So that's extremely important. But it's only one of many things that is important. And just to mention some of the long list of other things, which, I want to repeat as many times as I can, that any attempt to imply that one thing explains them is by itself makes it likely to be a mistake. Just to mention some of the many things. One of them is low self-control. Another is a drinking problem. Another is stress. The list goes on and on of well-established things, scientifically established things that are been proven and are ignored. The World Health Organization published a list of 16 well-established risk factors like this for partner violence. They completely ignore it. Even though they themselves published this list, they focus on just one, namely patriarchy. That's correct, but a big error, because that's only one of many, many things. Well, let me say that the three questions as I heard them, there are several aspects to each question, but let me just take them up in the order. The first one was about the CTS, and I won't say much about that. The CTS, the instrument used in more than half of quantitative research on domestic violence, has been demonstrated to be valid and reliable over and over and over again in many countries. But and that's why it's used so widely, even as this caller pointed out, by people who are ideologues and deny the results. It has an ironic aspect. Because the CTS is the dominant instrument, it's used by most of the studies, it provides the best means of denying the validity of those findings about equal rates of assault by men and women. People simply think it's sufficient to say that the CTS is invalid, misleading. Therefore, results can be denied. You read this over and over again. And the most frequent thing, they say it ignores context. It just counts the number of assaults. Well, it does count the number of assaults. That's its virtue. That's the hard behavior fact. But the problem of ignoring context is the research of those people who make the criticisms and don't attend to the context. The CTS doesn't just count number of assaults. That's one of the 4 of the 5 scales. It also measures injury. And people say it's ignoring this big context, the difference in injury. Well, CTS provides a measure of that. They say it's ignoring the intransigence of the partner. CTS measures that. It's ignoring psychological aggression. No, it doesn't. There's a scale. So the guilt for ignoring context is on the critics of the CTS who failed to use its 4 or 5 scales. But ironically and unfortunately, it provides such a convenient method of denial by asserting that the CTS is invalid. It's done over and over again by people who simply don't want to accept, for ideological reasons, the fact that women assault as often as men. It's been demonstrated, even the U.S. Department of Justice, which spends millions of dollars every year supporting programs that claim to treat partner violence through this model, which is based on assuming that the cause is male dominance. Even the Department of Justice, in its review of literature, said that it has no demonstrable beneficial effect. So, but why do they continue to do it? To the point that many of you this afternoon have pointed out that it's an ideological commitment to male dominance and patriarchy as the cause. So that's what the Department of Justice in the U.S. follows that too. So we need to have a more multifaceted treatment program than the Duluth model. And in relation to the third point, a part of it that I heard, because this breaks up from time to time, on the interventions need to recognize the multiple causes. If your intervention is about drinking problems, that's going to take care of some of the cases, but not most of them. If your intervention is about male dominance, it's going to take care of some of the cases, but not most of it. If your intervention is about personality disorders, it's going to take care of some of the cases, but not most of them. No one can take care of most of them because there's so many. So there needs to be a system in which there is initial intake, diagnostic measurement, to find out what are the factors occurring in the cases being treated, and focus the treatment on whatever that diagnosis shows, not on some predetermined cause. And Erin, I hope you'll excuse me for this, that includes intergenerational transmission. There's many, many violent men and violent women who were not brought up in violent homes, and many who were, most in fact, who do not repeat the crime. That's true of every risk factor for almost any medical or social problem. Just to give you an example that everyone knows about, heavy smoking. We all know heavy smoking causes lung cancer and other diseases. A third of heavy smokers die of it. Well demonstrated epidemiological evidence. So that's very clear. That 1/3 makes it also clear that 2/3 do not die of it. And the same thing with those brought up in violent families. 2/3 of them don't do it. Now,
yeah, I always think that's fascinating. You know, Murray, because I used to ask myself, I get a mother in with, say, 4 children,
and to
of
do
which,
it,
yeah,
the percent is much higher than those not brought up in violent families, but most do not.
So I think that's a good point. We've made it before, but you just actually gave me a number on this, that, you know, okay, most people who grow up in violent environments do not become hitters. But it's a huge risk factor for it. Now, what were you going to say, Erin?
Oh, no, I'm just going to say to Murray, no, Murray, I absolutely agree with you. The thing that was so interesting to me was when the families came into the refuge, the mothers and the children, and we also saw most of the men. When the children came in, you could actually pinpoint very quickly which child or children were going to continue with the violence because they were already grossly disturbed as they came in. There are other factors that can create violence in children which are outside influences from the family, say much later in life. But my argument always, along with both the mothers, the children, and the men, was simply this. If your strategy as a small child for survival was to lash out because you were lashed out at, then you have to learn an alternative way of coping with your life skills. And most of the work that I did with the mothers and the children was teaching them different life skills. And also when you work with both the men and the women, it's the same argument. It's if this is how you've learned to protect yourself and to keep yourself safe, what you have done is to recreate a dangerous lifestyle for yourselves. If you want to make changes with each other, then you have to change the way that you approach each other and take care of each other. And it is possible, and I had very long-term residential programs. They were all closed down because at that time it was the patriarchal argument. Therefore, it called for a massive revolution. And, you know all the political jargon that goes with that. But it's a human problem. And it is the great point of all this is, yes, it's better if the children come in very young to the influences that will help them unlearn most of what they have learned in terms of how to behave and socializing. But the brain is incredibly elastic and plastic, and whatever time you take a look at your life and realize that your attitude to life is aggressive, bombastic, and dangerous, you can change. This is what we should be doing.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, if there's a general heading that covers what is probably the most frequent cause, it's inability to manage social relationships, including partnerships. So the treatment programs needs to have high priority, but it's not, like everything else, not the only thing.
No.
Because
and how does that, is there...
important as a family is in influencing the child's behavior, it's only one of many factors. For example, there are genetic differences well established by modern brain science and genetics. Genetic differences in propensity to violence. That's just a start. Then the family is not the only socializing influence. There are other people that can treat the child cruelly, treat the child humanely. Why don't we hear about it? One thing is where practitioners don't ask about it. And second, when they do ask about it, they only ask about assaults by men, not by women. And that applies, as I mentioned before, to researchers too. Those who've investigated children experiencing violence, almost all of them only ask about violence by the father, not about by the mother. So, as I said, we can't know about things that we don't seek to find out. And the other thing is, when we know about it, it's not just that we don't ask about it, but it is so often rejected. I've talked to social workers who work in child protection work, and I've asked them, what do they do in cases where the mother is violent as well as the father? And now, this is not a large sample. It's not even a sample. It's 4 that I could just happen to talk to. And every one of the 4 said, well, it must be self-defense. They just refuse to deal with it as a problem by itself. So that even when they know about it, they reject it as something that needs to be acted on.
Yeah, well, you see, the thing is, I did have a program. I had a whole therapeutic community, long-term residential care for people who had been savagely abused as children. And the reason it was closed down is because it exactly as Murray says, it was countering the view, the prevalent view, which is still prevalent, even though the people on the street and many people in these establishments know the truth now. You're asking, in a sense, Maria, in your field, there are a huge amount of master's degrees, PhD degrees, BAs, and all the rest that would have to be thrown out because most of them were actually passed erroneously because most of the information in so much of that work is wrong. Books, yes. The books are they'd have to be rewritten. Entire practice codes, which were trained by feminists to everybody, from the police to the judiciary, that would all have to be thrown out. You're going to have to deconstruct a huge empire.
Well, I think that the patriarchal model is a comfortable place for people to inhabit mentally. And the reason why is because we view women as being acted upon. We view them in the class of being acted upon, and we view men as actors. And it's just sort of an emotional attitude that we have. So we look for how women are victims, and when men are obviously victims, we look to try to reframe it as them acting, and therefore we place blame on them. And that's sort of our comfort zone, I think, when we look at human interactions, and I think that applies to domestic violence as much as anywhere else. And the only problem, I would say, is that these ideologues who are promoting this model based on that and appealing to that is, if you appeal to that, you enforce it. So don't turn around and say, women are acted upon, women are acted upon, women are acted... Oh, wait, they can be presidents and soldiers. It doesn't work like that. If you want to push the idea that women can be anything that men can do, anything that men can do, you can't push, and one side of your mouth say that, and the other side of your mouth constantly focus and emphasize and promote this idea that women are acted upon, that women are obviously victims whenever they're in an interaction with men, and men cannot be victims of women because it's almost like a taboo. It's like something we can't even conceive of. A man being acted upon by a woman? Oh my goodness, the world is going to implode. So I'll just put that out there. My concluding remark.
It is a good remark. I take your point, and I tend to agree with it. We do seem more comfortable thinking of women as acted upon rather than being actors in their own right. And that puts, well, Warren Farrell has said it too, a woman's strength is the illusion of her weakness, and a man's weakness is his illusion of strength. I think there's a real truth to that observation. This patriarchal model, which is false, not only puts men who are truly not able to help themselves in just a horrible strait, but what does it say to women? I mean, Erin, I think you said this. You find it you told me you find it bloody condescending, haven't you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I always have. And I thought America And I remember standing on these platforms and saying to these huge audiences, again, mostly of women, I can't be the only woman that takes responsibility for my own violent behavior. And there'd be a dead silence and nobody'd say anything. The fact is that it's absolutely fine. Both men and women are capable of evil. Both of us are capable of things that we do that we're ashamed of. But you cannot be ashamed if you were born into a violent, warring family if you don't learn loving, peaceful strategies, because how are you supposed to learn if nobody's around to teach you? And mothering and fathering are taught. They're not innate in people. And we don't give people a second chance in this society. What we do is we imprison men, and the way they punish women, certainly in England, because I'm the one there fighting it, is to take away any child she has if she is deemed an unfit mother. Well, how is she supposed to mother if nobody's mothered her? My argument is we need to start at the beginning. Mother and father and parent, people who have never had a chance to learn.
Okay, well, I'd like to start wrapping up the show.